In the days following the 1941 attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States was understandably in a state of panic. Especially concerned were the people on the West Coast, fearing that the Japanese might choose to attack them next. Cities like Oakland, California and Juneau, Alaska began having nightly blackouts in an effort to prevent a hypothetical Japanese air attack from seeing its targets. On the night of the first blackout in Seattle, Washington, a 19-year-old girl named Ethel Chelsvig convinced a crowd of 2,000 drunk people to take to the streets and smash any lights that were still on. She asked them, "Are you going to stand by while these lights threaten the very life of our city?" before leading them into downtown Seattle, where they smashed windows and neon signs while even attacking police officers who tried to stop them. Because nothing will help defeat Japan better than attacking your own police force. At one point, the drunken mob temporarily stopped their rampage to sing a group rendition of God Bless America. It all makes you hearken back to a simpler time, when a group of rioters would pause to pay tribute to their country and teenagers were named Ethel. Still, it's no surprise that the state prohibited the sale of alcohol during blackouts the very next day. Although that didn't solve the problem of driving, as one night saw 10 people in Seattle injured in car accidents. All this just to stick it to the Japanese. And while the blackouts and other nationwide panic was mostly unwarranted, the Japanese did strike the mainland United States a few months later. In February of 1942, a Japanese submarine surfaced off the coast of California and bombarded the shore. After Pearl Harbor, the Imperial Japanese Navy had 7 submarines patrolling the west coast of the United States. They mainly attacked merchant ships, sinking 2 and damaging 6. But on February 23, 1942, President Franklin Roosevelt was set to give one of his famous fireside chats for Americans to listen to over the radio. In some ways, the fireside chats were like a precursor to podcasting, except FDR never read any ads for Squarespace. The one on February 23rd was only the second fireside chat since the Pearl Harbor attack, and the hype was building. Roosevelt had even asked everyone to have a map of the world in front of them while they listened to it, so Americans knew that Roosevelt was about to drop a banger. It ended up being listened to by 61.3 million people, truly the Super Bowl of its time. I can only imagine how many people pre-gamed the fireside chat with a few gin rickeys. Anyways, the Japanese government had heard about the fireside chat and wanted to take away some of the attention, so they ordered their navy to fire on the coast of California. The mission was conducted by a submarine with the fun and creative name of I-17, which was captained by Commander Kozo Nishino. I couldn't find a picture of him, but I did find 2 other people with the same name, so I'll use their pictures instead. One of them is a famous sculptor, and the other one was a ballet instructor who coined a breathing technique, so it's safe to say that we're dealing with the most sinister of the 3 Kozos. The submarine surfaced less than a mile off the coast of the Ellwood Oil Field near the city of Santa Barbara. At 7:15 p.m., Nishino ordered the crew to fire the submarine's deck gun at a fuel tank, hoping to cause an explosion. Unfortunately for the crew, their aim was horrible. The rounds landed all over the oil field, alerting the handful of employees on the premises. They noticed the submarine and decided to call the police, which feels like a tame reaction to a foreign military attack, but I guess there's not really a hotline to the US Coast Guard. The aim of the submarine was so bad that one of the shells went over a local inn. The owner of the inn also called the police and was told that warplanes were already on the way, although they never showed up. I guess the first foreign attack on the mainland United States since the War of 1812 wasn't quite enough for the military to get moving. Or maybe the soldiers were just too invested in that captivating fireside chat. After 20 minutes of firing, Nishino and the crew of I-17 called it a day, sailing back into the Pacific. When all was said and done, the shooting damaged some of the Ellwood Pier and destroyed a pumping station and an oil derrick, which is apparently what these things are called. Nobody was killed or even injured, and the whole thing only caused about $500 worth of damage. One historian described the shooting as almost leisurely. Here's a picture of a local resident next to a door that was damaged in the attack. And please accept my apologies for showing you such brutal carnage without a warning. Strangely, for a while it was widely believed that Kozo Nishino had picked the Ellwood Oil Field because he had been there in the 1930s. The story goes that Nishino was working on a Japanese tanker that was picking up oil from Ellwood, and he decided to go for a stroll in the area. He walked past a nearby cactus patch and was so enamored by the cactus that he climbed a fence to take a piece of it home to his garden. But he slipped and fell onto the cactus instead, causing a nearby group of American oil workers to laugh at him. He was so humiliated by the experience that he remembered it for years and decided to get revenge on the men who laughed at him by choosing their workplace as the target of the attack. As hilariously petty as that would be, none of it is true. Nishino never worked on a commercial ship and was in the Japanese Navy since 1920. Somehow this story was spread for decades before it was finally debunked a couple years ago. And even though it was probably just made up to get people to visit that cactus patch, I know that if I don't mention it, someone is going to leave a comment telling me I missed the best part of the story. But hopefully my subscribers know I would never miss something as ridiculous as that. Anyways, as weak as the attack on Ellwood was, the Japanese were not really trying to decimate the West Coast. The real goal was to incite panic and fear in the people of the United States. And in that, they definitely succeeded. Immediately after the attack, the US Army ordered all radio stations in Southern California to stop broadcasting, which probably didn't do much to calm people down. Locals began calling 911 with claims that they saw the submarine communicating with someone on land using signal lights. One man even claimed that he saw the submarine heading south towards Los Angeles, even though in reality it just went back to Japan. But that was enough to really get the panic going. The day after the Ellwood bombardment, the Office of Naval Intelligence warned everyone that there might be an attack on California within 10 hours. I'm sure they meant well, but I feel like that warning probably caused more panic than an actual attack would have. That night saw everyone in Los Angeles on high alert, until the tension finally burst at around 2 in the morning. Reports began to flood in of an enemy aircraft being spotted overhead, causing air raid sirens to go off around the city. The FBI and local sheriffs began arresting Japanese people who they believed were signaling to the skies. Thousands of reserve air raid defense wardens were summoned to their positions across LA, and shortly after 3 a.m., the city began firing .50 caliber machine guns and anti-aircraft shells into the sky. But as you might have guessed, there were no foreign planes at all. So the city of Los Angeles was going to war with nothing. And in that war with nothing, people still found a way to die. As the streets descended into chaos, car crashes started happening left and right, killing 3 people. 2 other people had fatal heart attacks due to the stress of thinking they were going to die, which caused their body to expedite the process. But at least their relatives can say they died in the war, and everyone will think they went out in a much cooler way. All in all, the US military fired over 1,400 rounds into the sky before things settled down around 7 a.m. Some of the shell fragments also damaged buildings and cars, ultimately causing more destruction than the actual attack by the Japanese the previous day. The next morning, Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox announced that the entire thing had been a false alarm. And he was a fitting person to do it, since every photo of him looks like he just found out the entire thing had been a false alarm. But the Secretary of War, Henry Stimson, tried to save face the following day by saying that maybe there were some Japanese planes flying overhead, they just weren't full-on military planes. Because there was no way the government was going to let this opportunity for fear-mongering go to waste. Years later, the Japanese military even admitted that they never flew any planes over LA during the war. It was determined that the whole thing was likely caused by a weather balloon in the sky, which people mistakenly thought was a Japanese plane. And to be fair, you can see why they made that mistake, since both of them are things that are in the sky. But as ridiculous as the confusion was, you'd think someone would have considered that it might not be the smartest idea to fly their weather balloon in the middle of the night while the city was on high alert for an overnight air raid. Ultimately, the legacy of the attack on Ellwood goes far beyond the $500 of damage, as it also caused what is now dramatically known as the Battle of Los Angeles. 2 days after the Ellwood attack, Radio Tokyo announced to the Japanese people that Santa Barbara, California was devastated by enemy bombardment. Japan even made a postcard commemorating the attack, because nothing says "wish you were here" like a picture of a military bombardment. The official records of the Imperial Japanese Navy say that they left Santa Barbara in flames, so both nations' militaries got to pat themselves on the back and lie to the public. And we can add that to the long list of lies told by people in this story. For several months after the attack, the American Women's Voluntary Services ran a war bond drive to supposedly avenge Ellwood. They used the money they raised to purchase a fighter plane named the Ellwood Avenger. Unfortunately, that plane never saw any combat because it crashed into another plane on the runway of a Florida airport. But I guess that's fitting, considering the only thing it was avenging was some light structural damage. The Japanese continued their petty attacks by launching incendiary balloons over the United States in an effort to start a forest fire. But they launched them all in winter, so no fires were started. Japan even flew a plane over Oregon and dropped an incendiary bomb on the forest, but the fire was put out by 2 guys named Keith and Raz. The Japanese also did actually attack Alaska in a legitimate military campaign, but that story is much less whimsical. Now please consider subscribing, or I'll have a mob of 2,000 drunk people break your windows and sing God Bless America.